If you enjoy epic HFY stories, interstellar diplomacy gone wrong, and humanity proving its worth against the stars, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment about your favorite moment. It helps the channel grow and brings you more stories like this one. Now let's dive in. Captain Rylan Ward had negotiated with species that breathed plasma, species that communicated through scent, and even one that insisted every meeting begin with synchronized throat singing, but none of that prepared him for the weight sitting on today's agenda. Humanity's first peace summit with the Threx Dominion had the entire lunar embassy station humming with contained nerves. He walked through the polished atrium, his steps steady, his expression unreadable, but the tension clung to him like tightening gravity. Beside him, Major Elias Grant stood with the rigid calm of a man built from discipline and old scars. Taller, broader, and quieter than Rylan, Grant's presence had the effect of stabilizing a room the same way a steel foundation steadied a starship. He tracked every movement in the hall, every flicker of light, every tightening jaw of the personnel preparing for the diplomatic event. His focus was absolute, yet his voice, when he spoke, carried a dry warmth that cut through the high-strung atmosphere. "You look like you're walking into a funeral," Grant murmured. Rylan gave a thin breath of amusement. Given what the Threx are bringing with them, it might turn into one. Grant didn't laugh. He rarely did. But he tilted his head, waiting for the rest. "Their message last night," Rylan continued, "about arriving with their sacred enforcer, that wasn't ceremonial phrasing. Their military archives describe the creature as capable of tearing through cruiser plating. If they're using it to test our nerve, it's an aggressive opening gambit." "A bully showing up with his biggest friend," Grant said. "Standard intimidation tactic." "Except this friend eats tanks," Rylan replied. Station personnel rushed past carrying equipment crates, security scanners, and translation modules. The usual quiet formality of the lunar embassy felt disrupted, every person moving with clipped urgency. Humanity had been waiting a decade to solidify peace with the Threx, but the Dominion never did anything without dominance layered into the gesture. Today's arrival was no exception. The docking alarms chimed, a deep, resonant pulsation that rolled through the station like a heartbeat. Conversations died instantly. The embassy's panoramic viewport dimmed its tint to compensate for the harsh ultraviolet glow of the Threx capital ship settling into place. Its hull shimmered with shifting, scale-like plates, a design that looked alive even when still. Rylan exhaled once, centering himself. Showtime. They joined the reception line as the airlock cycled. Steam hissed. Heavy magnetic clamps locked. A column of armored Threx soldiers marched through first, their glossy exoskeletal armor resembling carved obsidian. Behind them came the diplomatic envoys, tall, reptilian figures with slit-pupil eyes that flickered in calculated assessment. Then the floor vibrated. A deep, guttural rumble rolled through the corridor, followed by the clank of reinforced chains. Grant's hand drifted instinctively toward his hip before he remembered the summit required peacekeeping gear only. The creature stepped through the airlock. It towered above every living thing on the station, 30 feet of muscle layered under black, ridged plating. Its 6 limbs ended in scythe-like claws, and its jaw looked designed to bite through armored vehicles. The Varkan's breath came out in shuddering growls, each exhale frosting the air in front of it. Even its handler, a heavily decorated Threx officer, kept his distance, holding a chain that looked far too thin for something so monstrous. Rylan felt the shift in the room at once. Fear. Primitive, visceral, undeniable. The same fear humanity had known on Earth when apex predators stalked the dark. Grant didn't move. His eyes locked on the Varkan, assessing angles, distances, possible reactions. He looked like he was studying a battlefield, not a beast. One of the Threx diplomats raised his chin proudly. "Behold our sacred enforcer. It detects deception. It senses weakness. If you come in dishonor, it will know." Rylan stepped forward before anyone else could react. "Humanity seeks peace, not posturing," he said, keeping his voice even. "But we won't negotiate from fear." The Varkan swung its massive head toward him. Its nostrils flared. Chains rattled as it leaned forward until its maw hovered just inches from the marked boundary line of the reception hall. Its eyes narrowed at Rylan with an intelligence that unsettled even the Threx soldiers. Grant shifted subtly, placing his body between the creature and his captain, though he never broke eye contact with the beast. It was a protective gesture he'd practiced 1,000 times, but never against something that could break a man with one swipe. "Captain Ward," the Threx envoy said, "you stand unshaken before the enforcer." "Bull. We expected your species to tremble." "We grew up with predators," Rylan answered. "We learned to face them, not kneel to them." A flicker of confusion rippled through the alien delegation. They didn't understand courage without coercion. They didn't understand loyalty without chains. Good, Rylan thought. Let the misunderstanding work in our favor. The Varkun's rumble deepened, echoing through the chamber like distant thunder. It sensed something, curiosity, irritation, or perhaps the absence of fear where it expected a feast of it. Its massive tail scraped the floor, leaving sparks in its wake. Grant leaned closer to Rylan. If the rest of the day goes like this, he muttered, your negotiation schedule is about to get interesting. Interesting is fine, Rylan said. Uncontrolled carnivorous terror is not. Grant's lips curved into the faintest suggestion of a smile. Then it's a good thing you planned ahead. Rylan didn't look at him, but the corners of his eyes tightened. Let's just hope our countermeasure makes the point we need. The Threx delegation stepped aside, ushering Rylan and Grant toward the ceremonial hall where the first phase of peace talks would begin. Behind them, the Varkun's roar shook the corridors, vibrating through the bones of every human present. It was a declaration. A warning. A challenge. Rylan glanced back once at the towering creature and whispered, just loud enough for Grant to hear, if they want to intimidate us with their predator, they're about to learn we brought one of our own. And with that promise hanging in the charged air, the summit officially began. Rockin's containment module glided across the embassy floor on silent magnetic treads, its reinforced glass faintly reflecting the cold whites of the overhead lights. Major Grant walked alongside it with a posture that bordered on reverence, one hand resting lightly on the console that regulated temperature, humidity, and the subtle vibration pattern meant to keep the animal calm. Captain Rylan Ward observed the procession with the same measured calm he had shown the Threx delegation, though now there was a hint of anticipation sharpening his expression. The arrival of the Varkun hadn't shaken him, but it had confirmed exactly what he expected from the Threx: domination disguised as diplomacy. Grant keyed in a security sequence, and the pod's outer casing opened in a controlled bloom of segmented panels. The air shifted as the interior habitat depressurized. A heavy, earthy scent, musk mixed with forest loam, spread into the hall, drawing the attention of the human security staff who had been trying not to stare. A striped figure stepped forward with a deliberate, almost regal grace. Rockin emerged fully, a massive adult Bengal tiger whose amber eyes swept the room with intelligence far beyond instinct. His presence was a stark contrast to the Varkun's monstrous bulk. The tiger didn't roar or posture. He simply existed with an authority earned rather than imposed. His fur shimmered under the white lights, each stripe curving like brushstrokes crafted by a patient artist, and every movement held the lethal fluidity of a creature designed to dominate through precision, not chaos. Rylan spoke quietly, more to himself than anyone else. He'll make the point without theatrics. Grant nodded, his voice low. He always does. Tigers don't perform intimidation. They just are. As Rockin padded forward, the human technicians unconsciously stepped back, their instincts acknowledging the power in the animal's quiet steps. Grant lifted a hand and Rockin slowed, brushing against his leg with surprising gentleness. The connection between man and beast was clear. This wasn't ownership nor coercion. It was trust built on familiarity, respect, and years of patient guidance. Rylan had brought many unusual negotiation tools to alien tables: linguists, cultural advisors, even an empathic AI that once moderated a near war, but nothing compared to the silent gravity of the tiger standing beside Grant. This wasn't a weapon. It was a statement. Humanity's relationship with danger was fundamentally different from the Threx doctrine of control. Ready? Rylan asked. Grant's reply was simple. He is. The doors to the ceremonial chamber parted with a hydraulic sigh, revealing the Threx delegation already assembled in a crescent formation. Their armor gleamed under the hollow lamps, but their composure faltered the moment Rockin crossed the threshold. The Varkun, chained at the far end, lifted its plated head with a jerk as a new scent hit its nostrils. Its growl was not the dominant thunder it had unleashed earlier. It was low, uncertain, edged with something rare for the beast. Hesitation. The Threx envoy stiffened. Their handler tightened his grip on the chain. The Varkun's 6 limbs reoriented as it crouched, studying Rockin with predatory scrutiny. Yet the tiger simply sat, tail flicking once, his gaze calm and unbroken. Where the Varkun frothed with defensive aggression, Rockin radiated unadorned self-assurance. One of the senior Threx diplomats stepped forward, his scaled brow furrowed. This creature is small, he said, searching for the proper term. Is it symbolic? Rylan answered without hesitation. He represents our nature. We do not bring monsters to intimidate. We bring partners to stand with us. A murmur spread through the Threx formation. They could not conceive of partnership with something that could kill. Their own predator required shock coils and handler squads. Rakan required only a single man's quiet gesture. The Varkan's chains clattered as it shifted closer, nostrils flaring. Its handler barked in order, tugging at the restraints. The beast froze, but its muscles twitched with barely contained tension. Rakan's ears angled forward, acknowledging the sound, yet he didn't retreat. His steady gaze held a message neither human nor alien could fully translate, but everyone understood. He would not be frightened. Rylan moved toward the central negotiation dais. Today's talks are about balance, he began, his voice carrying across the chamber. Not dominance. Not fear. The galaxy doesn't need another empire imposing authority by force. The Threx's lead ambassador flicked his forked tongue in irritation. Force is what brings clarity. Weakness begets chaos. Then we disagree on what weakness looks like, Rylan replied. He nodded subtly toward Rakan. We don't chain what we respect. The Threx delegation fell silent. Their gazes shifted between the tiger and his handler-like companion. Grant stood behind Rakan, arms relaxed, eyes forward, posture suggesting not control but companionship. It was alien to the Threx, a paradigm they couldn't map onto their worldview. Suddenly, a harsh clang echoed through the hall as one of the Threx aides dropped a crystalline data rod. The Varkan reacted instantly. The beast lunged a full meter, striking against its restraints with a teeth-rattling crash. Its handler staggered, shouting commands that barely contained the surge of violence. Rakan rose in a single fluid motion, not with panic but poised readiness. His body lowered into a stance that balanced speed and stability. His tail swayed, slow and deliberate as if marking time. Grant's hand lowered, signaling calm, and Rakan's breathing steadied even as the Varkan snarled and snapped. The contrast was mesmerizing. A monster chained and raging beside a predator who needed no restraints to remain composed. Rylan angled his body toward the Threx leader. Tell me, he said softly, which is more dangerous, a creature you fear so much you bind it in irons, or one who chooses control on its own? The Threx leader didn't answer, but his throat scales fluttered, a sign of unsettled contemplation. The handler finally regained control of the Varkan, forcing it back with a jolt of energy through the chain. It hissed, furious but retreating. Rakan relaxed almost instantly, returning to a seated posture that made the Threx guards exchange confused glances. Grant stroked the tiger's shoulder, murmuring something Rylan couldn't hear, and Rakan responded with a slow blink, the tiger equivalent of serenity. The Threx witnesses stared as if witnessing impossible sorcery. The tension in the room did not dissipate, it changed. It became charged, thoughtful, uneasy. The Threx had unleashed their show of dominance. Humanity's answer was something quieter, stranger, and far more challenging to their worldview. Rylan stepped back toward the negotiating circle. Shall we begin? He asked. The Threx leader hesitated before nodding. We proceed, for now. Rylan caught the subtle phrasing. Not agreement, uncertain allowance. The real conflict simmered just beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest disruption to erupt. Rakan's tail curled around his paws as he settled beside Grant, the picture of composed readiness. The Varkan's eyes never left him. And for the first time the unstoppable Threx warbeast looked unsure. The negotiation chamber settled into a brittle quiet, the kind that carried tension like static. Every figure present, human and Threx alike, felt the precarious balance that hung over the talks. Rakan rested calmly beside Major Grant, but his ears angled subtly toward every sound, listening with the instinctive vigilance of a creature who had survived the wild before ever learning to trust a human hand. Across the room, the Varkan crouched like a loaded weapon, muscles coiled beneath its armored hide, eyes fixed on the tiger with a predatory intensity that wasn't aggression alone. It was rivalry. Captain Rylan Ward stood at the center of the circular dais, projecting steady authority as he outlined humanity's proposed framework for shared border governance. His tone carried a diplomatic control that masked the calculation underneath. He could feel the room tightening with every exchange. The Threx delegation responded to each clause with clipped indifference or open suspicion. Their eyes kept drifting toward Rakan and the Varkan, as if the true negotiation was happening between the predators rather than their representatives. Threx General Korvax rose abruptly, his broad frame casting jagged shadows across the illuminated floor. He fixed Rylan with a stare that seemed to test for the slightest crack. Your species speaks of cooperation, he hissed, yet every clause you propose assumes our compliance. Dominion requires strength, not the illusion of equality. Rylan didn't flinch. And strength without reason becomes tyranny. We're offering a structure that benefits both sides, not one that diminishes yours. The general's tail snapped once, striking the floor with a sound sharp enough to make the aides behind him recoil. You presume to lecture us on tyranny? He spat. You stand under our enforcer's gaze, shielded only by your fragile beast. Grant tensed, but Ryland's raised hand stopped him. The captain's voice remained even, though his pulse quickened. Rockin isn't a shield. He's a partner. We don't bring weapons into negotiations. Only our principles, and our allies. A murmur rippled through the Threx line, confusion mixing with disdain. Their worldview had no place for partnership between predator and prey, no understanding of bonds forged through mutual respect instead of fear. The Varkan growled, low and resonant, as if rejecting the notion entirely. Its handler reinforced the restraints, but the creature continued to stare at Rockin, claws flexing against the floor with a metallic scrape. The sound echoed through the chamber like a countdown. Ryland resumed his explanation of the treaty's next point, but even his voice couldn't hide the rising tension. Every word risked triggering another outburst. Every hesitation signaled weakness the Threx would pounce on. Yet humanity couldn't afford to show fear, not when the slightest perception of submission could unravel a decade of diplomacy. Grant leaned closer to Ryland during a brief pause. They're baiting you, he murmured. Korvax wants you off balance. He wants an excuse to claim we're unstable, Ryland replied quietly. The Varkan's here to back that narrative. Grant's eyes flicked to the beast. It's not just here to look scary. It's reading the room. And it's confused. Our comm is throwing it off. Calm wasn't the word Ryland would have chosen, but he understood. Rockin's unshaken composure created a dissonance the Varkan couldn't process. The Threx believed predators only acted through dominance and brutality. They didn't understand balance. They didn't understand a creature who could kill with a single strike yet chose stillness instead. One of the Threx aides stepped forward, voice trembling. General, the enforcer's bioreadings indicate elevated agitation. It's detecting conflicting signals. Korvax snapped without turning. Then control it. We are attempting to, General, but... Enough. The general's voice cracked through the chamber with a force that made even some humans flinch. Rockin didn't move except to narrow his eyes, a subtle gesture that only Grant caught. Grant crouched beside him, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. The tiger breathed out slowly, the rumble deep in his chest quiet and controlled. Ryland redirected attention, hoping to diffuse the growing volatility. We can revisit the territory clause, he offered, if your concerns revolve around. Korvax slammed a clawed fist onto the table, making the hollow display flicker. Your concessions mean nothing. You stall for advantage while pretending at diplomacy. We see through you. The Varkan jerked at the spike in aggression, pulling its handler forward several steps. Chains groaned under the strain. Rockin rose with a soft, almost soundless shift of weight, positioning himself half a step ahead of Grant. The tiger's head lowered, muscles tightening beneath his fur, but his growl, barely audible, carried a tone distinct from the Varkan's wrath. Not challenge. Warning. Ryland spoke over the rising chaos. General, control your enforcer. We came here to talk, not? Talk is deception. Korvax roared. We knew you would hide treachery behind pleasant words. Your species has no place dictating terms to the Dominion. Grant stepped forward, shielded by Rockin's looming presence. If we wanted treachery, he said evenly, we wouldn't have walked into your jaws without weapons. The general hissed, but Ryland cut in sharply. Major. Grant held position, eyes locked on the Threx leader. It was not a threat, just truth delivered with unshakable steadiness. Even the Varkan seemed momentarily uncertain, head swiveling between tiger and man as if trying to understand a bond it had never witnessed in its war-driven existence. Ryland sensed the moment shifting into instability. Every gesture, every sound mattered. We can lower the temperature of this exchange, he said, but we need space to do so. Before anyone could respond, a loud crack split the chamber. One of the restraint clamps on the Varkan's harness snapped loose. The beast lunged instinctively, only to be yanked back by the remaining binds, but the sudden motion threw the room into disorder. Gasps, shouts, boots scraping on polished flooring, it all merged into a swell of panic. Rockin responded instantly, stepping forward in a fluid surge of strength. His roar broke through the noise, deep, resonant, controlled. Not fear. Not frenzy. A command. A declaration that the chaos would not swallow his territory. Even the Varkan froze at the sound. The entire Threx delegation stared, thrown off balance. The general himself faltered, eyes widening at the sight of a predator asserting authority without being provoked into mindless savagery. Grant steadied Rakan with one hand and looked to Rylan. "This is spiraling." "I know," Rylan replied, pulse tightening. "And we haven't hit the breaking point yet." Across the chamber, the Varkan strained again, chains creaking under the force of its frustration. The snap of the broken clamp lay like a warning shard on the floor. Things were no longer merely tense. They were nearing the edge of catastrophe, and everyone in the room could feel the drop coming. The sound of the restraint clamp hitting the floor lingered like a threat no one could ignore. The Varkan's handler stumbled backward, shouting commands that barely reached the creature's frenzy-clouded mind. The beast lunged again and the second clamp strained, metal groaning under the violent pressure. Rylan felt the air tighten as though the entire chamber was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable rupture. Grant's voice cut through the chaos, steady but urgent. "Rylan, we need to clear this room." "Not yet," Rylan replied, eyes locked on the Varkan. "If we panic, the Threx will call us cowards, and worse, the creature will take it as permission to attack." Grant moved closer to Rakan, keeping his body angled toward the tiger. Rakan's muscles rippled beneath his striped coat, but his stance remained controlled, deliberate. His gaze didn't flicker from the Varkan. He read the room as instinctively as any diplomat: danger, fear, and the fragile thread of power that held every decision in place. The Threx delegation erupted into arguments. Several soldiers stepped forward, weapons raised, but the general barked an order that cut them off. "Stand down. None fire unless commanded." His face, usually carved from unyielding arrogance, showed the first signs of panic. Even he understood what a misstep here could ignite. Interstellar war, catastrophic and immediate. Then the remaining clamps snapped. The sound was hollow, final, cruel. The Varkan surged forward with the force of unleashed fury. Its armored limbs pounded the floor, claws sparking against polished alloy as it barreled toward the nearest group. 3 Threx envoys frozen in shock. The beast's maw opened, revealing rows of serrated teeth meant to tear through hull plating. Rylan didn't think. He moved, sprinting toward the envoys with instinct overriding diplomacy. He grabbed one by the arm and shoved him clear as the Varkan slammed into the wall where they'd stood, denting metal and scattering fragments of embedded circuitry. "Move!" Rylan shouted, pushing the others toward the exit. The Varkan wheeled around, its eyes now locked on fresh prey, him. Grant shouted his name, but the warning came too late. The creature charged, shaking the chamber like a collapsing corridor. Rylan dove behind a fractured support column, the Varkan's claws slicing through the space he'd occupied a heartbeat before. Rakan moved. The tiger launched forward with a surge of raw, explosive power. His roar cut through the air not as a threat but as a challenge. The Varkan pivoted just in time to meet the strike. The two predators collided in a thunder of muscle and fury, Rakan's claws raking across the beast's armored hide, the Varkan's tail whipping around to slam into his flank. Grant drew a stun baton from a fallen guard, the weapon crackling with electric arcs as he sprinted to intercept. "Rakan. Hold position, don't let it corner you." Rakan wasn't listening to words, he was responding to movement, momentum, the silent guide between him and Grant built over years of shared survival. The Varkan thrust forward with crushing weight, snapping at Rakan's throat. The tiger twisted away, jaws clamping onto the creature's forelimb where the plating thinned. The impact reverberated through the room. Threx soldiers finally moved in, creating a wide perimeter and shouting overlapping commands. Their own panic made the situation worse. The Varkan fed on chaos like fuel, growing only more violent with every noise spike. Rylan scrambled to another position, assessing the architecture. He spotted a maintenance corridor off the main hall, its reinforced blast door half open from earlier equipment checks. An idea struck with enough clarity to seize. "Grant, we need to draw it toward the decompression hall." Grant didn't look away from the fight. "You're out of your mind. It's the only place strong enough to hold it." The Varkan lunged again, this time catching Rakan across the shoulder with a glancing swipe. Stripes darkened with blood, but the tiger dug his paws in, refusing to yield. His growl deepened, rumbling through the chamber with primal fury. Grant moved to flank the Varkan, jabbing the stun baton against its side. The beast recoiled as electricity crackled across its armored hide. "Rylan, get to the hall." Grant shouted. "I'll steer it." Rylan sprinted toward the corridor, dodging debris and fallen supports. The Varkan's head snapped toward him, senses catching the movement. Grant seized the opening, slamming the baton against a softer joint. The creature howled and barreled toward Rylan exactly as needed. Rockin tore after it, refusing to leave either man unguarded. His loyalty wasn't obedience, it was choice, fierce and absolute. The chase tore through the chamber, scattering Threx delegates who dove out of the lethal path. Rylan reached the decompression hall controls, panting as he slapped the release sequence. The heavy doors groaned as they began to part. The Varkin surged closer. Rockin closed in from behind, roaring in a fury that shook the corridor. Grant sprinted to catch up, baton flickering as it drained. The doors finally slid wide. "Now!" Rylan shouted. Grant hurled a shock canister at the floor. Light exploded, sound cracking like a thunderclap. The Varkin faltered, staggering just enough for Rockin to slam into its side and drive it across the threshold. Rylan slapped the control. The doors thundered shut, locking with a seismic jolt that reverberated through every wall. Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the metallic clicking of Rockin's claws and Grant's labored breathing. The tiger limped to Grant's side, pressing against him as the man steadied his companion with a shaking hand. The Threx watched, stunned into speechlessness. For once, even General Korvax had no words. Rylan stepped forward, sweat running down his jawline, voice low but unwavering. "Your enforcer nearly killed your own people," he said. "Ours saved them." No one argued. Not yet. But the consequences of this moment waited like a storm on the horizon, ready to break. The decompression hall doors sealed with a final, echoing clang, leaving the Varkin contained yet visibly enraged behind reinforced plating. Silence settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket, broken only by the low, controlled breathing of Rockin beside Major Grant. Captain Rylan Ward straightened, brushing debris from his jacket, his eyes sweeping the Threx delegation. They were shaken, not just by the near catastrophe, but by the undeniable display of human resolve and the profound bond between man and predator. The lesson had landed. Fear alone did not dictate outcomes when courage and loyalty held sway. Korvax stepped forward, armor dulled with the grime of panic and frustration. His scaled throat flexed as he regarded Rylan with a mixture of anger and begrudging respect. "Your species," he began, voice tight, "you risk everything with companionship. You wager control not with fear but with," he faltered, searching for a word in a language shaped for dominance. "With understanding." Rylan allowed himself a small nod. "Not all strength is displayed through aggression. We survive because we recognize limits, and we respect the power that walks beside us willingly." Grant's hand stroked Rockin's fur, sending a ripple of reassurance through the tiger. Rockin leaned into the gesture, calm, unyielding, a living testament to everything humans had always known about patience, discipline, and trust. The Threx delegation had no precedent for such a bond. To them, submission was obedience, loyalty was forced, and control was absolute. Here they saw something alien: choice. One of the junior Threx aides spoke, voice quivering. "General, the enforcer. It acted against its own." "Yes," Korvax interrupted, tone clipped. "It was provoked into frenzy by its own handler's error. We failed to anticipate its instincts. We underestimated the consequence of chaos unchanneled." Rylan stepped closer. "Then you understand what we mean when we say a creature, no matter how powerful, is not controlled by chains or threats. Respect and trust, not fear, dictate behavior." A heavy pause stretched across the chamber. Even the human Marines held their breath. The weight of the lesson hung palpable, pressing against the Threx delegate's sense of superiority. This was no mere negotiation, it was a revelation. Grant crouched slightly, murmuring to Rockin, "Come, show them what you mean." The tiger rose, slow and deliberate, and walked the short distance between the humans and the alien delegation. Each step measured, graceful, and controlled, he came to rest in front of the Threx generals. His amber eyes held no challenge, only acknowledgement of shared space and the calm certainty that he would defend those he had chosen to stand with. The room held its collective breath. Even the Varkin growled, a low, uncertain rumble that suggested recognition of its counterpart's dominance, not through force but through mastery of composure. It had never encountered such power channeled through restraint. Rylan spoke, voice carrying clarity and authority. "This is what it means to coexist with a predator. Power unchecked is destruction. Power guided by loyalty and choice becomes a shield, a partner, a force for survival." Korvax's throat scales twitched as he absorbed the lesson. "Your species, you face predators and walk beside them willingly. We have never seen this. Not in centuries." A murmur ran through the rest of the Threx assembly. Humans had survived countless threats on their homeworlds, yes, but here was living proof. A predator who obeyed not out of fear but out of trust. Their paradigm of control faltered. It was both unsettling and humbling. Rylan allowed a brief smile, though his expression remained measured. It is the same with diplomacy. You can intimidate, you can coerce, but true understanding, true stability, comes from mutual respect. The junior aide swallowed, nodding. We will record this as a precedent. Perhaps, future treaties can follow this path. Rylan's eyes shifted to Grant, who gave a subtle nod of approval. Rockin padded back to the duo, pressing against Grant's legs, his stripes glinting under the ambient lights like living armor. The human marines and station personnel exhaled in collective relief, the chamber now charged with a new kind of awe. Korvax turned toward the Varkin, now sedated and restrained for rehabilitation. We will reevaluate our approach. The Enforcer's actions have shown us the flaw in our assumptions. His words carried the gravity of a leader recalibrating centuries of doctrine. Humans, you have earned our respect. The room shifted as the first genuine bow from a Threx delegate touched the polished floor. Not submission but recognition. Humanity had stood firm, not through threat or dominance, but through courage, wisdom, and the quiet authority of a tiger who had chosen to protect rather than destroy. Rylan exhaled slowly, finally allowing himself a trace of satisfaction. Major, he said, voice quiet, almost intimate, think they'll remember the tiger more than the treaty? Grant chuckled low and dry. They'll remember the lesson. And they'll remember who taught it. Rockin nudged Grant, tail curling around his legs. The tiger's gaze lifted toward Rylan, amber eyes reflecting quiet intelligence. It was a bond neither words nor diplomacy could fully capture, one born of survival, trust, and shared purpose. In that gaze, Rylan understood what had made humans endure, flourish, and today prevail. The Threx leader finally spoke again. We will proceed with discussions. A new framework, guided by mutual respect. Rylan inclined his head. Agreed. Let's start by acknowledging that strength is not measured by fear it can inspire, but by the restraint it can maintain. Rockin sat beside Grant once more, a living emblem of humanity's principles and its instinctive mastery of danger. The room exhaled collectively, the tension of near disaster giving way to a tentative, hard-earned equilibrium. Even the sedated Varkin seemed to pulse with grudging acknowledgement, an echo of recognition that another kind of predator could exist, one that chose loyalty over rage. The first phase of the treaty was signed, hands shaken, claws withdrawn, and amber eyes still fixed on the humans who had walked into peril without flinching. Rylan allowed himself a grin, a small victory in a galaxy that often measured worth in fleets, firepower, and domination. Today worth had been measured differently. Grant chuckled, brushing dust from his uniform. Next time they bring a war beast, he said, voice low, should we bring a bigger cat? Rylan glanced down at Rockin, who blinked slowly, amber gaze calm and unyielding. I think we just might, he said, voice tinged with humor and certainty. Outside the chamber, the galaxy waited, unaware that humans had just redefined what it meant to face a predator, and emerge not only alive but victorious. For the first time, the Dominion understood that humanity did not bow to fear, did not kneel before threats, and walked through chaos with companions of lethal loyalty by its side. And somewhere in that quiet, amber eyes glimmered, promising that humanity's reach, like its courage, was far from over.